When you walk into the voting booth, this is what you're voting on. First, Twitter locked the New York Post out of their Twitter account after the New York Post published a damning story revealing emails from Hunter Biden's laptop that show Hunter Biden profiting from Joe Biden's position as vice president and possibly even holding money from China for Joe Biden. Democrats like Congressman Adam Schiff claimed this was a Russian disinformation campaign, yet Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe said the intelligence community has zero evidence or intelligence that the Hunter Biden laptop is part of a Russian disinformation effort. So Twitter shifted their narrative. The reason the story was stifled, you weren't even allowed to tweet the link, by the way, to the article. The reason the story was stifled, Twitter says, was because the article violated the hacked materials policy at Twitter. Except the emails weren't hacked. So we're not stupid. We can see what's happening. Big tech is in bed with the Democrats who don't want you to know about Hunter Biden's corruption because it hurts Joe Biden. So big tech censors conservatives who try to talk about the Hunter Biden story, and Democrats defend big tech censorship. And this is not just a theory. Big tech CEOs were hauled in front of the Senate to answer for the blatant censorship of conservatives. Both Twitter and Facebook admitted there is no evidence of Russian disinformation behind the Hunter Biden story.
Okay, for both Mr. Zuckerberg and Dorsey, who censored New York Post stories or throttled them back, do either one of you have any evidence that the New York Post story is part of Russian disinformation, or that those emails aren't authentic? Do any of you have any information whatsoever they're not authentic, or that they are Russian disinformation? Mr. Dorsey,
we don't.
You have no. So why would you censor it? Why did you prevent that from being disseminated on your platform that is supposed to be for the free expression of ideas, and particularly true ideas?
We believed it fell afoul of our hacking materials policy. We judged in.
What evidence did you have that it was hacked? They weren't hacked.
We judged in a moment that it looked like it was hacked materials.
You were wrong.
Surfacing, and we updated our policy and our enforcement within 24 hours.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Zuckerman? Mr. Zuckerberg?
Senator, as I testified before, we relied heavily on the FBI's intelligence and alerts to us, both through their public testimony and private briefings and alerts they gave us.
Did the FBI contact you and say the New York Post story was false?
Senator, not about that story specifically.
Why did you throttle it back?
General.
Why did you throttle it back?
They alerted us to be on heightened alert around a risk of hack and leak operations, around a release of information. And Senator, to be clear on this, we didn't censor the content. We flagged it for fact checkers to review, and pending that review, we temporarily constrained its distribution to make sure that it didn't spread wildly while it was being reviewed.
Then Senator Cruz asked Jack Dorsey, CEO of Twitter, does Twitter have the ability to influence elections? Take a look.
Mr. Dorsey, does Twitter have the ability to influence elections?
No.
You don't believe Twitter has any ability to influence elections?
No, we are one part of a broad spectrum of communication channels that people have.
So you're testifying to this committee right now that Twitter, when it silences people, when it censors people, when it blocks political speech, that has no impact on elections?
People have choice of other communication channels with which...
Not if they don't hear information. If you don't think you have the power to influence elections, why do you block anything?
Well, we have policies that are focused on making sure that more voices on the platform are possible. We see a lot of abuse and harassment, which ends up silencing people and having them leave from the platform.
Dorsey denied, by the way, that Twitter censors conservatives, but then Dorsey lied and said Twitter never censored President Trump's account. In fact, Twitter has censored President Trump at least 65 times. And then Dorsey all but admits there is no standard practice for what Twitter censors. Watch.
You said you do not have a list. Is that correct? You do not maintain a list?
We don't maintain a list of accounts we watch. We look for reports and issues brought to us, and then we weigh it against our policy and enforce if needed.
You look for reports from your employees or from the
from the people using the service.
Right, and then they turn that over to your board of review. Is that correct?
So in some cases, algorithms take action. In other cases, humans do. In some cases, it's a pairing of the two.
There are numerous examples of blue check marks that are spreading false information that aren't flagged. So Twitter must have some kind of list of priority accounts that it maintains. You have the blue check mark list. How do you decide when to flag a tweet? You got into that a little bit. Is there a formal threshold of retweets or likes that must be met before a tweet is flagged?
No.
So basically, when they see conservative content that potentially hurts a Democratic presidential nominee like Joe Biden, censor it. And this censorship only happens to conservatives. It's never the reverse. It never happens to liberals. For example, Michigan Democrats manipulated a video of John James, but Twitter then refused to label it as deceptively edited. The Chinese Communist Party also claimed that the US military was to blame for COVID-19, and that hideous lie remained on Twitter for 2 months. Jack Dorsey himself even defended allowing Iran to threaten to eliminate, and I quote, cancerous Jews because he wants to respect their right to speak. What? You respect the right of a murderous, anti-Semitic Iranian regime to speak, but you don't respect the right of American conservatives or journalists to report negative things about Joe Biden? You don't respect their right to speak freely? And Twitter engages in this blatant discrimination of conservatives, all in the name of misinformation. And yet, when Jack Dorsey was asked about real misinformation, about Holocaust denialism, he said that's allowed on Twitter. Watch.
So somebody denies the Holocaust has happened is not misinformation.
It's misleading information, but we don't have a policy against that type of misleading information.
And then Dorsey had the audacity to say that some people don't trust that Twitter is acting in good faith. No, Jack, you're darn right we don't think big tech is acting in good faith, because you can't name one liberal who has been censored on social media. Yet conservatives like me, like Graham Allen, Mark Levin, Tucker Carlson, Live Action, the Susan B. Anthony list, and the New York Post, and that's only naming a few, have been demonetized, stifled, and downright canceled on social media, coincidentally just weeks before the presidential election, all because we're conservative. And Democrats like Adam Schiff excuse the censorship. Democrats like Joe Biden echo the Russian misinformation nonsense. Democrats across the board actively want conservatives to be silenced. This is what the anti-free speech left does. This is what you're voting on. The left bullies and shames and stifles and silences and ultimately cancels any free speech they don't like, while the right invites you to answer speech you don't like with more speech. That is your choice this election. Choose your president wisely.